I started this project out by selecting an East Indian Rosewood blank, and I've known for a while now that I wanted to use this blank to make a lidded box. And I haven't mentioned this in previous videos because this is my first box video, but turning lidded boxes is one of my favorite wood turning projects. As far as the design or the form, I really didn't know where I was going with this until I thought about it for a while, and I decided to go with a mid-century modern kind of a style, and then break up that form with the finial, adding a twist later on. And when it's all said and done, it should be nice and sleek, have a luxurious feel, and possibly some minimal decorations or texture. I'm going to estimate the finished piece with the finial to be about 5.5 inches tall by 6 inches in diameter. And because of the way that this blank was sawn or rough milled, there's going to be a wave pattern where the grain faces up on two sides and the grain faces down on two sides. I'd also like to mention that this East Indian Rosewood has some natural resins in it and interlocking grain that can really wreak havoc on your tools. So it's definitely a good idea if you're using this species of wood to sharpen often. And another thing that is extremely awesome with East Indian Rosewood is the smell when you machine it. It smells great. So you can start to see the wavy grain pattern now and some of the colors that are popping out. There's even some purple, reddish, and some green in there, which is really neat. And at this point, I'm going to add a recessed tenon on the bottom of the box. And I want to do this because I want to save as much wood as possible, and I want the box, when it's all said and done, to be as tall as possible. The only downfall to making a box this way is later on I will have to do a through tenon with my finial. You'll see that later on where the wood worm screw is. But you can make your box between tenons if you'd like, or some other method. Here was a spot that was really stubborn to come out. It was on the end grain side, and it was more of that white resin popping through on this piece. But eventually I got rid of it through some sanding. I just backed the grits up and go back up to 600. And after I finished sanding, you could really tell that the finish is going to be really, really nice later on. This type of wood really finishes well. And that white resin spot you can see is now gone. Next, I'm going to section out the box from the footer and the lid and maybe some decorative lines in there. And a safety tip to keep in mind if you are going to turn your box this way, make sure you leave enough thickness to clear the woodworm screw. You don't want to hit that with your tools. Now, mixed in there, if you haven't noticed already, is some smoke. And I left this clip in there to show you what a dull parting tool will do. And I immediately went to the sharpener. I also don't add a convex to my thin parting tool for chip removal. You also might find that some of the shavings get stuck in such a thin spot. So every so often, the deeper that I get, I have to just take some of those shavings out. And what will help is if you do a relief cut on the side. But I don't want to take too much wood away here because I want the grains to flow from the lid to the base without really any disturbance. Now, one of the drawbacks from a 1/8 inch thin parting tool like this with a short handle is that you can't go very far over the tool rest or else it'll pull down and you can get catches and have yourself a bad situation. So I'm going to just stop when I get about 3 inches over the tool rest and then switch over to a saw that luckily fit into such a thin slot. Decisions. Here I'm going to add a dovetail tenon so I can add this to my four-jaw scroll chuck. And I'm basically at this point going to make the dowel end that'll stick out and actually go into the lidded top. And I'll just size that up and make sure it fits in there really, really snug. Here I'm just going to take a card scraper and scrape an area in the center so that the finial can sit flat, really flush, and there's no gaps in between. You probably could have done this step on the lathe by turning the lid around on the wood worm screw, but I just did it this way. And I also sanded that little 2x2 inch square section with 120 grit sandpaper. And it came out pretty well. It had a really nice tight fit between the two pieces with hardly no gap in between. It was even all the way around. And I'm just going to adhere it with some thick CA glue or Sienna acrylic glue or super glue, whatever, however you want to call it. And that should hold pretty well, or you can use some wood glue. I just didn't feel like waiting that long. And after I remove the rest of the dowel sticking out, I'll just do a light sand up to 600 grit. And at that point, I'm going to add some detail on the center of the lid. And I'm using a Robert Sorby texturing tool to do that with some gold, or I think it's antique gold gilt cream, and a gold Sharpie marker to give a really crisp line around the two edging bands that I added with the skew you just saw a few seconds ago. And this is my go-to rubbing alcohol to clean some of the edges up. And here is the Sharpie marker I'm using for the lines. So at this point, I'll just put the lid aside for now, and I'm going to work on the bottom of the box. I'll core out the inside, I'll add the lip at the top for the lid to sit on, and I'll also add the footer. And it's a really good fit. It's not too tight, so it leaves a little bit of room for expansion and contraction. And to ensure that I don't go too deep on the inside of the bowl and come out the recess on the bottom, I'm going to drill a hole first, and I'll know where I need to stop. Also, if you don't own any stop colors for your drill bits, you could just use a piece of masking tape. And I believe I've mentioned this in other bowl videos that I've had, that I'll switch over to an S-style tool rest when I get a little deeper. That way I have a lot of tool support. And once I have the majority of the material cored out, I'm going to switch over to this box scraper, and it really does a great job of getting 90-degree angles from the sides of the walls and the bottom of the box. And I've found by using this type of box scraper that you don't want to, and this is just my opinion, like try to hog off too much material at once, because it starts to vibrate a lot. I mean, it can, but it's just better to take smaller cuts, or scrapes rather. And I'll sand the inside and the rim up to 600 grit. And this is probably a good time to answer a question, or a couple of questions that I keep getting. People wonder what the dust hood I'm using behind my lathe is, and it's called a Big Gulp dust. It's made by PSI, Penn State Industries, and it has a 4-inch outlet, and it works really well. I guess it depends on what kind of dust collection machine you have. Mine is attached by these steel bars that could be moved, so I could move the dust collector up and down the lathe, but it's attached to the lathe bed right now, and I want to move it off of that because it gets in the way of my tailstock, which I'm going to use to hold the lid on to finish my finial. And I'm going with sort of a pot on a pot kind of a finial. At one point, I thought of hollowing the finial out and making a lid for that, and having a pot on a pot, kind of like nesting dolls, sort of, I guess. But I scratched that idea. Maybe another time. Another benefit to turning a box this way is I can look at the box right now as a whole and shape the finial to match it. And that helps out with its overall design and form. And once again, I'm going to add some detail right around the finial, just to make it a little bit wider. I also decided to add a Capricorn stone on the top, and I believe it's a blood dragon jasper stone, which I'm hoping will accent the greens and reds that are in this piece. I also have a few new additions to the shop, like these Nova mini coal jaws, which this is the first time I'm using them, and so far they seem pretty good. You can't go over 600 for safety. Actually, I think it's 800 for the mini coal jaws and 600 for the regular size, but I would just stay under 600 for safety anyway. And the last thing I need to do is just cover up the stone here with some tape before I use a spray acrylic sealer, and it's a matte finish. About 3 coats with light sanding in between, and 3 coats of a Renaissance, like a microcrystalline wax. Oh, and before the video's up, I'd like to mention that I haven't been feeling well lately, so if I sound a little off or I'm a little slow, it's because I haven't been feeling well, and so just bear with me. Well, I really like this blank. This piece of wood is so... The video and pictures just don't do it any justice. There's so many colors and grain patterns and swirls on the side. It's just absolutely a stunning piece of wood. I also like to mention that this was my very first wood turning that I ever did years ago, and you can even see the screw holes here where I had a faceplate, and I was not very good when I started. But this is the very first project I ever did on a lathe. I was so excited to get into the lathe, and I always wanted to make boxes. So I hope you enjoyed the show and you're still watching. And it was kind of a long video, but I hope you learned something from it, took something out of it. And it's definitely just one way to make a wooden box on your lathe. So until next time, please stay safe in your shop at all times. Take care, and thank you.